Hey everyone, it's Jonny from Ignite here. Welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be doing another deconstruction of a student's response to a 5-mark comprehension question for section 1 of the common module. So we are going to look at this question here, analyze the ways in which this text explores the relationship between creativity and books. And that is a 5-mark question. Remember, the first thing you always look at are the marks. Okay, so 5 marks. That's what I'm interested in because now in my head, I am creating a scaffold of the kind of answer I want to write. I want to know where I need to put what. Where do I need to put the concept? Where do I need to put the techniques? How many techniques should I have? So let's look straight away at the structures that you could use for a 5-mark question. The first structure you can use, which this student has used, and this is fine, is a 1-paragraph structure, but it's a long paragraph. Because we know that with a 3-marker, you do 1 topic sentence with 2 pieces of evidence. We know that with a 4-marker, you do 1 topic sentence with 3 pieces of evidence. And then with a 5-marker, it's a little bit different. You do 1 topic sentence, 4 pieces of evidence, and then a link sentence linking back what you've written to the question. Of course, you need to be making those links all throughout in any case, but it's just an added sentence that you want at the end for completion. Okay, the other structure that I typically recommend, and this is my default structure, is here, structure B. So I would actually have an introductory sentence where you introduce 2 key ideas that you've thought about that go towards answering the question in 2 distinct ways. That will then lead you into 2 body paragraphs. So this is a mini essay structure. Structure B is a mini essay structure, and I would use this structure for 5 markers, 6 markers, 7 markers, and anything above that. So you want to have an introductory sentence where you foreground the 2 key ideas. That is the way you're going to split up the mini essay. Then in your first body paragraph, you would do 1 topic sentence with the first idea, 2 pieces of evidence explained and linked to the question. Then do the same in the next body with your second idea, and then 1 concluding sentence. And in that concluding sentence, I like to focus on the impact of the text on the responder in relation to the key terms of the question. So it is similar to your thesis, but you may want to frame it slightly differently in that you're focusing on how it impacts on the responder, so you're not completely repeating your thesis or your introductory sentence. Okay, so that's the way I would do that. With a 6 or 7 marker, I would have 1 extra evidence effect. I would have 1 extra piece of analysis per body. So you would have a 3rd piece of evidence in each of these points if it was a 6 or 7 marker. For a 5 marker, 2 pieces of evidence per paragraph is enough because that totals 4, which is the same amount of evidence that we would have had up here for structure A, which is what this student did. Okay, again, my preference is for structure B. You can do structure A, especially if you're running short on time. Okay, so let's have a look again at this question. What are the key words? Analyze the ways this text explores the relationship between creativity, well, that's definitely a key word, and books, that's a key word. Okay, yes, we're looking at the relationship. I don't necessarily need to use that word explicitly the whole time, but it is important to keep that in mind that we need to show some kind of relationship. Let's have a look at the text now, and then we can see the student's answer and see how well they have answered it or where they could have improved. So here's the text. You can pause the video now if you would like to read this. I'll quickly show you both sides of the page. So it's called The Art of the Title Page. It is a research extract. That is a non-fiction type of writing. So if you need to practice with your non-fictions, pause the video on these parts of the pages. I'll just show you the other part of the page. There you go. So you can have a read through that if you like now, and then you can try and answer the question yourself. What this article is really about, if you want to have a quick look, I'm not going to read through the whole thing in this video. As I said, you can read it right now if you want by pausing. But it is basically tracing the development of a book and how the title page has evolved. So to give you an insight straight away as to what you could put into the topic sentence, you could actually talk about an evolving relationship, because that's what this article does. It's about an evolving relationship between the title page of a book and the book itself. Initially, the title page is described as simply being something that identifies the book. It's just a means of showing someone what type of book it is. What's the name of the book? Because they used to have these manuscripts where there was no actual official title page on the top. So it was very hard to distinguish one text from another. It's just like these piles of pages. This is what the article's about. Then the article goes into how the title page became more creative by its nature, and that became a way of enticing the reader and actually becoming a text in itself. And that's what the student will correctly point out here, that the title page is like its own text, and it actually gives you an insight in itself into the world of the book that you're about to read. So it becomes part of the creativity of the book versus simply being a means of informing someone about what book it is. That's the evolving relationship. That's what you needed to explore in this article. Let's have a look at the student's answer now. So the student's answer involves 8 sentences, okay? It involves 8 sentences. They did structure A. Remember up here, structure A. Now, they didn't perfectly execute structure A. They have a few sentences that weren't needed, and that's why they've done 8 sentences. You will see that they could have easily done their answer in 6. Having said that, even if they did do the answer in 6 sentences, I would probably say this would only get a 4 out of 5 for reasons that should become clear later. I think it was lacking a little bit of evidence and critique there, and a couple of the points just went on too long. You could have done some of the points in 1 sentence that were done in 3 sentences. So let me take you through it. The research extract proposes that the creative aspects of the title pages and binding in books are of equal importance as the context of the books. And just like books, the creativity associated with them is also a text and holds contextual messages. I actually really like this topic sentence because it's very specific and it definitely answers the question as to what the relationship is. It says that they are equally important. The creativity of the title page, that is, so we've specified it's about the title page and the bind-in, and we're saying they're of equal importance and that the creativity actually holds messages just like the books. So I can clearly see you talking about a relationship. As I said, you could have talked about how the relationship was evolving. That would be a good way of setting the frame in the topic sentence, because as you work through the actual article, you realize it is basically talking about how the relationship between a title page has evolved in relation to the book, in that it went from being informative to creative and actually becoming a text in and of itself. So really good topic sentence. I'm not going to change things too much which are already going to get the mark unless they're really long, but I quite like this. That's a good example. That's 1 mark there achieved. Okay, so 1 of the marks from that topic sentence. I like that. You can see here I've done sub-dot points for me to make edits, but we don't need to deal with those 2 now. On to the second sentence here. The rhetorical question at the beginning, how would anyone know which par was which book, has the effect of allowing the readers. Notice how it says has the effect of allowing the readers. For those of you who struggle with time, you don't need all of these extra words here. You could just say allows the reader. Allows readers even. That's even shorter. Okay, allows readers. See how we've just shortened that up? Don't worry about the fluffy language and the extra words has the effect of. Just go straight into a verb. That's a key insight. Go straight into a verb. So allows readers to deem title pages as a necessity just by picturing a bookseller in 15th century Europe and before Patton even delves into the research. Now, you don't need necessarily this last part here. It does give context, and I like giving context in these answers. Now, this sentence would get the mark in my opinion as it is because it says necessity, and that's the key thing, right? How would anyone know which pile was which book when the article talks about how the books used to just be these piles of pages without a cover page, without a title page, right? So the fact that the rhetorical question is saying, of course you need a title page, it's just necessary, I think that's a really good insight, and the fact you've said necessity clearly ties to what this quote is about, which is that of course you need it, because otherwise how do you identify the book? So it's a necessity just by picturing a bookseller in 15th century Europe. I don't know if you need all the rest of it. I'll tell you something I would potentially tweak. The rhetorical question at the beginning, how would anyone know which pile, allows readers to deem as a necessary, I'll say necessary, means of identification, irrespective of its creativity. I like the irrespective of its creativity as an add-in here because it links back to the question and says, hey, the relationship between books and the title page wasn't always one that involved creativity. It was actually just a practical means of identification. Okay? Necessary or practical means would have worked here, irrespective of its creativity. It's a great first point to make because now we're going to explore how creativity comes into it. I don't think you needed the extra context here, but you wouldn't have lost a mark, or rather you still would have got the mark for that sentence. Okay, so you're on 2 out of 2 at the moment. Okay, if that's how we're doing it. I mean, this is how I would be marking it. I think you've got 2 points out of the 5 possible points so far. Look at the next sentence though. This is where the student starts to go astray because they didn't stick to the structure. It's so important with section 1 comprehension. You just stick to a structure, stick to a formula. Time is so short. You don't have time to have these random sentences that kind of go astray or add extra insight when you've already made an insight. You just get to the next point, give us the next technique, give us the quote, tell us what it means in relation to the question. Okay, so indeed this necessity for a distinguishable feature was then transformed into a form of advertisement as well as identification. This is like another topic sentence, and this is exactly why structure B may have been useful. So structure B for this student would have been useful because they could have done one more piece of evidence to further this point here, as long as it was slightly different. And then you could have gone into the next body paragraph where you said, however, the relationship evolved into one of advertisement rather than identification. So this is sounding like a topic sentence, even though the student's answer was all one paragraph as far as I saw. And even if it was 2 paragraphs, they didn't have enough evidence supporting the first point. Okay, so straight away they've kind of got this sentence that's kind of a topic sentence wedged in the middle of the body paragraph, which doesn't work. I would go straight into the next technique and make the next point. This might have been your next point, but you should have brought evidence along with it. This is just a waste of time, a waste of words. Also, one thing to pick up, even if it did have a piece of evidence next to it, this sentence wouldn't have actually got the mark in my opinion, because I can remember seeing these exact words in the article. So you should have at least quoted it and then told us a different technique or a technique associated with this quote if you wanted to get the mark, but you can't just take words from the extract and use it as your own effect. Let me show you what I mean. If we look back here, you can see they've taken the words there, becoming a form of advertisement as well as identification. Look, they've taken the exact thing there, so it should have been in quotes for one, and then you would have looked for a technique there. There is no immediately obvious technique for that particular quote, and that's why this sentence overall is just not necessary, in my opinion. But be careful there. If you're going to use words directly from the extract, make sure you quote them. Obviously, the marker will have read that text a few times, and they'll be able to see if you've just copied their words and you're using them as your own. So make sure you use quotation marks if you do this. But as I've said, I actually would omit this sentence. Waste of words, waste of time. Next one. Here, after pattern lists several binding jargon, where's the binding jargon? Are you going to give me the example? No quote to back this up. It definitely should have included a quote with the list of binding jargon. I'm not sure exactly which part they're referring to here, but I do like the list here, by the way, if you can see this, embellished with figures, flowers, animals, urns, and cherubs. The technique there is accumulation. So why don't I just change what the student said there? I'll copy paste that. See here, they didn't use a quote in their point. They did make a point, but they didn't have a quote, so you don't get the mark for that sentence. So these sentences are only half doing it, but they get 0 versus 1. It's almost binary like that, okay? 2 sentences that only do half their job each don't equal 1 mark. They're just 0, 0. So 0 total. You've got to do everything that is required in each sentence. You can't do half of the job, and then somehow get a mark out of those. Now I'm just going to write another sentence to show you what a second piece of evidence could have looked like. Remember that the first point was about how it was a necessary means of identification, right? But now we want to say, however, it's important to use the right word here. Don't say moreover or furthermore, because we're actually going to be making a different point here. So we're going to say the relationship between books and their title pages evolved into one of creative advertisement rather than mere identification, which is revealed or suggested, or I'll say emphasized, which is emphasized through the accumulation. That means listing. There's a list here of figures, flowers, animals, urns, and cherubs. There we go. So we actually said the effect straight away and then brought in the evidence at the end. You could structure the sentence the other way around if you wanted to. So that is the new sentence that we are going to replace this sentence with, okay? So that sentence goes, that one stays. Looking at the next sentence now, later on, pattern illustrates in detail. Later on, I mean subsequently. Later on's fine. I mean, those little things won't mean you don't get the mark. Just get used to trying to use more sophisticated language if you can. Pattern illustrates in detail. In detail, I mean, I don't think we need that. Pattern illustrates creative developments and growing importance of the title page in relation to books until she states. I'm not sure if until is actually meant to be there. It doesn't really make sense. Elements of the Renaissance architecture often appeared on title pages. The text surrounded by an ornate framework. The design functioned as a doorway or entrance into the text. Okay, key thing here, this quote is longer than it needs to be. I think we just want to focus on one thing at a time, and there's too much in this. The main thing that I take away from this is that the design functioned as a doorway or entrance into the text. I really like that point. That's all we need. So the design of the title page functioned as a doorway or entrance into the text. Let's just use that. Notice how everything else in the sentence doesn't really explain the importance. There's just creative developments and growing importance. What is the growing importance? You've just given us a quote. It's a doorway or entrance into the text, but you need to actually now use your own words to tell me what the importance is. So a little bit too vague at the beginning there, and then a really long quote that actually detracted from the overall meaning of the sentence. Okay, so because the quote was too long, it's almost like you felt like that was a long sentence that does the job, but it actually should have been a much shorter quote. Always go as short as you can with the quotes. And then it actually would have helped you see that you needed to be more specific in how you were explaining its effect. So we're going to get rid of these parts. And before we come back and actually rectify the rest of it, note what the student's done in the next two sentences. Hence, it is evident that not only did the title page and the other creative features of books become message bearers independent of the book. I mean, I really like that idea. Holding contextual and commercial value, but there eventually was established a direct relationship between creativity. So this is really good, but that's like a link sentence to me. That's like a link. There is no actual quote or technique in there. And this is where students can go astray. So the student has included some really great information, but the structure wasn't quite there. And that has led to some errors, unintentional, right? Because the student clearly had the potential to get 5 out of 5. It's led to some errors because structurally it's a little bit all over the place, and we're missing quotes and techniques where we should have them. We're doing too much of the quotes at times. We need to do shorter quotes, more technique, stick to a structure until you get to the very last sentence, which is that link. So that to me looks like a great link sentence, but again, it comes kind of in the middle of the paragraph. It's a little bit awkward there. Have a look at the next sentence. This relationship is skillfully described through the metaphor of it being an entrance to the contents of the book. But hang on a second, that's the quote you had back up here. The design functioned as a doorway or entrance. So yes, that is a metaphor. Why didn't you say that up here? Why have you said it 2 sentences later? You're doing 3 sentences to try and get 1 mark. And in fact, that's all you would get. So 3 sentences there gave you 1 mark, which puts you at 3 out of 5 so far. But then if you see below, remember the other one didn't get 1, you would get 4 out of 5 so far if you included the one that I added in with the accumulation. But then if you see down here, I would have given 1 more point for that link sentence. This was their other link sentence. See, they have like multiple link sentences. Indeed, Patton suggests that the book is relying on and cannot offer the same experience without its creative aspects. I mean, yes, some of these ideas are all great, a little bit repetitive at times. That's because you're doing it so much. There's just too many sentences that have pure concept and no evidence. So remember, this student has done structure A. So let me take you up here to structure A. Each of the 4 middle sentences should have had a quote and a technique easily and clearly identifiable within them. But they didn't. There were about 3 or 4 sentences throughout the middle of the answer that didn't have all of those elements or both of those elements in each of them. Okay, so we need to be wary of that. We need to make sure we're ticking off the 4 pieces of evidence there and not getting carried away for a few sentences on 1 point. You just need to make the point in a more succinct way. So let's have a look at rectifying that last sentence there. So again, I would actually take out this. I would take out this because we're going to merge that. That's a point that should have been made earlier. This would be our link sentence to get me the point. Subsequently, Patton illustrates. See, I'm just going to show you guys a simple way of doing it. Subsequently, Patton uses the metaphor of the design. And notice what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use this quote, but I'm going to tweak the quote slightly. This is not always necessary, especially for comprehension. But because I want it to flow a little bit more in the sentence, look at this. Subsequently, Patton uses the metaphor of the design functioned as a doorway or entrance into the text. It doesn't quite make sense if you read it as a normal sentence. So what we can do here is we can actually alter the quote a little bit. Again, don't worry if you don't remember to do this. It's okay for comprehension, but if you can, we can actually put a square bracket in at the end to show we are tweaking the original quote, and we can change the tense so that it sounds correct as a full sentence. Subsequently, Patton uses the metaphor of the design functioning as a doorway or entrance into the text. Now it sounds like a normal sentence, even if the quotation marks weren't there. Okay, that's why I've added in the squares here, because originally it didn't say ing. I've added that in, showing the squares to show that alteration. Subsequently, Patton uses the metaphor of the design functioning as a doorway or entrance into the text. Okay, now we want to say the effect, and then we can move on and we're done. Demonstrate a creative title page. To demonstrate a creative title page as a kind of symbolic portal into the literary world of the book. Great, that's clearly what it's saying. It's a portal, symbolic portal, right? Because it's the metaphor. I probably wouldn't even need to say symbolic there, right? But the portal word is so important. That's where you get the mark, because that clearly relates directly to the quote that I'm talking about. A doorway or entrance. What's another word? Portal. Okay, I'm going to incorporate that into my effect. And then I'm going to say literary world of the book because it said into the text. So you're basically just getting these related terms to the quote itself to help you then answer the question in that sentence. You can note the contrast here between these two, but remember I took out a couple of the other sentences as well here because we've covered all of that territory now in one shorter sentence with one shorter quote. Let's see if we've got enough evidence. It's possible that the student still isn't left with enough evidence to get the 5 marks. Remember, we want 4 pieces of evidence. Let's have a quick look now. So we have the mark for the topic sentence, the mark for the first one on rhetorical question. We omitted that. We get the mark for the accumulation that we added. So we are on 3. We've got now the metaphor. So that takes us to 4. We do have the link here, which is a good link. But I would argue that even though you might think that's 5, it doesn't correlate directly in terms of the number of sentences, because even though it's a 5 marker, we want to have 6 sentences. We need that 4th piece of evidence. So just to rewind and show you one other piece of evidence that the student could have included, I think this bit's important down here where it says some of the most elaborate title pages appeared in 16th century Bibles, like the Great Bible of 1539, championed by Thomas Cromwell and authorized by King Henry VIII. Now, how much of that quote do I actually need? Probably not that much. I would just say the reference to Bibles like the Great Bible of 1539, right? So the author's inclusion of historical references to iconic texts such as... Now notice here how the quote I just copy-pasted was Bibles like the Great Bible of 1539. Actually, we can shorten this further just to show the example. We don't need Bibles such as, we can just say such as the Great Bible. That's what I mean by getting as short a quote as possible. It's just going to make you quicker, more efficient, and it will also mean that you won't trick yourself into thinking you've done the right thing because you've got more words in the sentence when really you haven't actually achieved everything you should have. What's the inclusion of that? That's our technique. What's the inclusion of that? That's not an allusion, by the way. We're not alluding to the Bible. We're actually referring explicitly to the Bible. So don't call that an allusion. I've seen students say allusion. An allusion is where it's kind of implied or implicit. It's not direct. This is an explicit reference. So here, the inclusion of historical reference is fine as the technique. What does that do? It tells us that it's really important to have a creative title page because we can ascribe spiritual importance to those types of books. So spiritual importance, religious importance. I'm thinking of those words because it says Bible. So think of words to do with the quote. That will help you say something specific in the effect. Reveals the spiritual importance of creative title pages for books of a religious nature. Okay, so this might be an additionally that we chuck in before our last point. So that would probably be my 3rd piece of evidence in this answer. Notice how I went straight into the technique, the author's inclusion of historical references, no riffraff, don't waste words, just say exactly what's going on. There's the technique, there's my short quote, there's my verb reveals, straight into it now. The spiritual importance of creative, there I've used the word of the question, title pages for books of a religious nature. There we go, relationship between creative and books. And notice how when I said creative and books, we actually elaborated creative title pages, books of a religious nature. So both times when we used the words of the question, we expanded on them simply by putting a few words before or after or both, right? In this case, creative title pages, books of a religious nature. Make sure when you refer to the key terms of the question, you do that slight but very important unpacking. If you enjoyed the video, please like, it means a lot. Comment below with your thoughts, with any other questions you may have, and please subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world. I'll see you in the next one.